everyone, it's Bob McCranie with Texas Pride Realty Group, brokered by HomeSmart Stars. We are continuing our Flee Red States podcast with Gene Brake. Now, I've known Gene since I was 11 and he was 12. We've been in real estate together for a long time. Notice I made you older. And
Yes, that,
we
well,
have
of
been in
course.
real, it made you, sorry about that. And we have been in the real estate, the LGBTQ real estate world for quite a while and have fought the good fight. And so today I want to invite him on to talk about people migrating from the red states to the blue states to the other countries and get his perspective on that. So Gene, give us a little background on how you got into real estate and take it away.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I got into real estate in 2009. So was licensed in 2009 in Northern Virginia initially. And so began my real estate career with the Big Red real estate broker from Texas, up in Northern Virginia. And was a very interesting market, as you can imagine. Most people were licensed in 3 states, and I'm like, no, I got more than enough business in one state. Let me stick to Virginia. The first day we moved there from the Seattle area, it was interesting. On the radio, there was a commercial for buy the M1X missile defense system. And I'm like, where the hell have we moved to? It's just a different world. We moved to Spokane, Washington in 2013. And so I've been licensed here right away since then. And so left the Big Red brokerage for a startup brokerage called EXP that was based here. I had to coerce them to come to the east side of the state. They were very West Washington based. And yeah, so very familiar with fleeing red states because I did so myself when I moved to the Seattle area and took a job in 2000 with Starbucks corporate headquarters. In 2001, actually, after 9/11, my company went bankrupt. They shut down. And so many call center type folks in Texas were looking for new work. So I ended up coming to the Northwest, and that's how I ended up here.
Excellent.
So yeah, it was a big shock moving from Washington, D.C. area to Spokane, Washington. We have in the Spokane County living in Spokane and Spokane County is very much like living in Austin, Texas, but on a smaller scale. The city of Spokane is very, very blue. We have city council 7, and 5 of them are progressives and 2 are conservatives. In the county, it is very different. Just outside city of Spokane, it is very conservative. And in our Spokane County, of the 5 commissioner seats, 3 are Republicans and 2 are Democrats. And then, of course, we are in the 5th congressional district, which is Eastern Washington, which is very red. It was Kathy McMorris Rogers previously, and now we have a placeholder in Mr. Baumgartner. Not my favorite guy, but he smiles a lot and he's popular with Republicans at least. I have even up here in the Northwest, we have had a large number of people moving here from other states. I myself have assisted clients from both Florida and Texas moving into the area. And primarily because of the politics, of course. And one was a trans family that needed to get to safety, and that's how they ended up here. We have a very trans-friendly, LGBT-friendly state of Washington, primarily driven by the voters in Western Washington, Seattle, King County, Tacoma area. And our real estate prices are very affordable. Our average price point for a home is about $415,000 right now. But in my immediate area, I have a lot of historic homes that I work with, and our price point here is upper threes, average upper threes. So there are options for West Coast prices. That's uncommon. So we do have people moving to the Spokane area from Northern California, from the Portland area, from Seattle area, where they can afford to buy a home here and work remotely. So we have a great
Excellent.
melting pot of people here.
So are you seeing more people come to Washington State because of its blue political history right now?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have many, so we are 30 miles away from northern Idaho. So, and we know the history of northern Idaho. And so we're 30 miles away from there, and we have seen people from Idaho and Montana looking at moving to the Spokane area, primarily because it has such a great reputation from being a gay friendly and trans friendly community, and yet it's still
For
close
people
enough
who
they can
don't
get
know
back to
about
family.
Northern Idaho, could you give them a little background on, for people who don't know, you and I may know, but let's
Northern
assume our
Idaho
audience doesn't.
has a storied past. It is um, white supremacists have sort of taken over an area just north of one of the most beautiful cities ever, Coeur d'Alene. Have kind of centered themselves there in that area, and there is a group with something I think called the Redoubt movement that is settled in that area. So it is they want to sort of start their own country, if you will. They certainly want to start their own state. They want Eastern Washington and Northern Idaho to secede from our states and become their own little place.
I did
So
not
it's
know
sort of
that.
like Northern California, the state of Jefferson. If you've ever driven through Northern California, there are big billboards, talking about join us on the state of Jefferson, and that is to secede from the state of California. Will never happen. But yes, we certainly have that. Many years ago, there was a problem. We have a very dynamic community here that embraces all cultures. And so we had the Martin Luther King Day March, and we had a bomb found on the march site. Thankfully, before the march happened, they found a backpack and it was on a bench right next to where we would have been marching. And that was many years ago. But there is that holdover and that those issues in northern Idaho. Also, a hotbed of militias in northern Idaho. Um, we haven't built a wall yet between Washington and Idaho, but I've certainly encouraged it. Um,
Very interesting. Yeah, Coeur d'Alene was where they had the U-Haul truck with 30 people jammed in the back to go beat up gay people at a pride event. And somebody
Absolutely.
saw that and turned it in, thankfully, before those people could be unleashed on unsuspecting families and
And
LGBT
most of
community.
those that were in that U-Haul truck were really from all over. They really weren't from Coeur d'Alene, but the organizers absolutely were. Also, just a couple of years ago during the NCAA playoffs, they for some reason thought it would be a good idea. The playoffs here, one of the rounds were in Spokane. They thought it would be logical to put a women's basketball team, college basketball team in northern Idaho, in Coeur d'Alene. And they had to move them because of threats from, they were just walking down the street to go to dinner. And they were threatened because, of course, they were African American. And we know the demographics of women's basketball tends to have some lesbian members. And so they had to move them to Spokane.
Outrageous.
So in many ways, I say it's very much like growing up in Texas. I grew up in Houston area, and so if we got outside, the core of Houston gets very conservative very quick. And like Austin, like San Antonio, where I spent about 20 years of my life and where my family still lives, sort of the same sort of thing. So I understood the dynamic. It felt familiar, but without, we have a very, like I said, very liberal mindset in Washington and in city of Spokane, certainly.
Gene, you just gave several examples of why, people might want to go to another state or leave the country altogether.
Yeah.
And these are everyday things to us, to our
Yes.
community. This is an everyday thing. This is not like, oh, this happens once in a while. This is on our mind every day. And, I know we'll hear people say, it's not always that bad. It's always in the back of our head. It's always right there. This could happen. This could happen. Everywhere we go, it's in the back of your mind. Oh, I can tell you where I'm at right now. I know where all the exits are. I purposely have my back I position myself that if someone comes through that door, I know where I can go next. Like
Right.
it and it's just part of my life now. Like
Yeah.
it's just who I am. And I don't it's not even like I come in as like, well, let me think about this. No, I can spot it like that. It's instinct where I'm going next. It is not, something that, I'm just overreacting. No, I am putting myself in a position to be as safe as I possibly can. And that's the same thing people are doing who are fleeing red states or fleeing this country entirely. They're putting
Yes.
themselves in a position where they can feel safe, where they feel comfortable.
Yes.
So, and
Absolutely.
yeah. So
Absolutely.
do you have how many clients or friends and family do you have that are either that are fleeing the country, are leaving the
Um,
country?
I have, well, one family that I assisted in moving out of Florida who moved here, sold their house recently, and they are either moving to Europe or they are moving to Mexico. Just because they said, um, can't, just can't do it anymore. It's time with especially with some of the extremism that we've seen coming out of the current administration. They're even more convinced that it is time to make a change and to move elsewhere. And so I don't blame them at all. I understand it. I will certainly hate to lose them as part of our community here, but understand. And so they are they're on a cruise right now, going to Europe, and they are going to cruise around, check out Europe, and then they ultimately, I really believe they're going to end up in Mexico because that's where they've been wanting to move for many years. But I have friends in Southern California, the Palm Springs area, who are positively planning to relocate to Mexico, or Europe or other places. So even in super safe places like California and the city of Palm Springs, you can't get much more gay friendly than the city of Palm Springs. But even they are saying it feels like it's time to, if you have the means, to do something about it and change the dynamic. And I certainly understand that.
So one of the things I was talking, everything you just said, yes. One of the things I was talking to a friend about is when you sit down with somebody and they're like, "Hi, who are you? How do you get to know you?" We end up trauma dumping. We end up telling people, you know, been in Texas this long. This is what it felt like. These are the Proud Boys showing up at our Pride event. These, and you end up just explaining who you are and how you got to be. You're trauma dumping on somebody who's just wanting to shake your hand and get to know you. But it's our lived experience.
Right, right,
It's our lived experience. And so to explain who I am, I have to explain what it was like and what it's been like living with that level of vitriol, to have our civil rights on the ballot every election, whether it's from city council to president, to have to fight and fight and fight. From Leslie and I both came out, 92, healthcare, the AIDS pandemic was still going on, to fight for all these systems and to be members of groups that were out protesting and doing stuff, and to win that, and to now have it pulled away.
yeah,
It's just, and you meet somebody new and they're kind of like, well, gosh, well, why do we want to, he's got some issues. It's just who we are. And so when you sit down with somebody like I did about 3 weeks ago, and we were just having beverages and talking, they got me. They knew, they've been through it too. I didn't have to
right,
re-explain it. We had this code between us, and we can just, oh, that, and they knew. And it
absolutely.
just felt like being almost with, I don't want to say with a survivor, but with a survivor who understood, and not somebody that you have to go, well, there was this thing. And I just had a Zoom call a few minutes ago with somebody who really does care about me and my future and the company and everything like that. And I'm trying to explain to him some things. And he kind of gets a little glassy eyed, like, well, Bob, if you feel that way. And I'm like, you don't live this. You don't understand why
Right.
it's important that we take care of this. Well, I trust it. I'm just optimistic about the future. And I'm like, that optimism is not going to protect us.
you can absolutely be optimistic, and I try to be optimistic as well. I think we all of us do. But at some point, you also have to be realistic and know that optimism will not save your life. It helps you deal with the trauma of day-to-day life, but it doesn't prepare you to survive whatever is coming. I mean, I'm older than both of you. I grew up in the Houston area. I grew up seeing, whites only signs everywhere we went. My doctor's office had a separate entrance for non-whites. Um, um, that wasn't that many years ago. I vividly remember it. I remember as a small child asking my mother, we went to a washateria, a laundromat to wash clothes. And there was a whites only sign. Mom, you can't wash that. It's red. That's not what it means. And it wasn't until later that I understood. I managed a retail store in Orange, Texas. And the drivers who would deliver to our store had to leave because they needed to drive through Vidor, Texas, which was a
Oh,
sundown
geez.
town.
Vidor
So,
is the poster of sundown towns.
yeah, I went to college in a small town called Pasadena, Texas, that had a Ku Klux Klan office. And on
Hmm.
Fridays and Saturdays, if you were driving down the road, the Ku Klux Klan was in robes, stopping you at the stoplight, shining a light into your car. So these are things that all of us carry with us. And so when they say, "Oh, that's ancient history," that is not ancient history. That was happening. That was in the late 70s that experience with the Ku Klux Klan was happening. I came out in 70s, mid 70s, 70. I graduated from high school in 1974. And yeah, so it was a very different world, even a short time ago. And so when I see, participated in the March on Washington in 1987, where, it was a wonderful, affirming experience. But just the next year, when I went back to volunteer for the Names Project, had an encounter with three skinheads and walking in the DuPont Circle neighborhood. So it's like I got away from them. Luckily, I talked my way in and out of the moment. But it's people don't understand that we have felt those, we have seen those, we have seen those moments. Saw a young man hit with a baseball bat in his head walking along Westheimer near Montrose. Um, Typical situation. Two young men in a pickup truck drove by yelling, calling us queers, and then jumped out with a baseball bat. And then when they took him away and we were trying to talk to the police about it, they weren't much better than the young men who hit him in the head with a baseball bat. So we understand. We understand that and understand it. And when you first started the Flee Red States um, movement and your site and talking about it, I thought, okay, it makes perfect sense. And I applauded it from the very beginning.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I've caught some shit for it. I mean, I've caught some flack. I've had people get up in my face and say, you're fear mongering. You're trying to profiteer off of you're redlining the state. How do you redline a state? You're the horrible person. We'll never lose gay marriage, or we'll never be. That'll never happen. And I'm like, I'm waiting for somebody to show me where I'm wrong.
Right.
Draw me on a piece of paper where I'm wrong. Show me that a 6-3 court is not lining up to overturn a Bergefell v. Hodges in Lawrence v. Texas. Show me where all 400 or 500 new bills in Texas House legislature that are anti-LGBTQ that they don't exist. And this is something I say in almost all the podcasts. He says Audre Lorde wrote, the final solution was not their first solution. There was a first, second, third, and 15th solution. When we
Right.
see these number of bills that go through, and let's say there's 300 or 400, I think, this year, or maybe more. Let's say that only 7% get out of committee and go to the floor. Every year that number increases.
Yes.
And they become laws. And that Kim Paxton and Greg Abbott and Dan Patrick are going to be frothing at the mouth to be the one who pops that up to the Supreme Court and takes down these things that protect us. And when somebody says I mean, this literally happened. We're all three members of the LGBTQ Real Estate Alliance, I believe. Um, at the Alliance meeting 2 years ago, I had somebody, very stately realtor gentleman tell me that I just need to write my congressperson and explain to them how LGBTQ rights are so important because they'll listen to you and go vote that way. That guy lives in Nancy Pelosi's district. I can tell you Ted Cruz gives no thought about what an LGBTQ person does in Texas. I will not be able to get into the office of my congressperson. So the blue state ideology of, well, just stay and vote against it. If you move, who's going to stay and vote against it? You don't have to stay somewhere where you're disrespected. You don't have to stay in a toxic relationship just because if you divorce the guy, he might change. No.
Yeah.
So thank you for saying that.
Well, I mean, again, it speaks to, and you and I have been at the same conferences where we have been, I'm, wearing my, I'm not an NAR fan, and everyone who knows me knows I'm not an NAR fan because I don't think they have done anything, have not done much for us other than give us lip service. And so when I saw that, they brought in Shannon McGann, and to speak to us at the gay conference, the Alliance conference in Vegas, I was horrified. It's like, she was part of the Trump White House before. What makes you think that she has any logic or bearing or is even listening to us? She's giving us lip service, and she's there representing NAR. No, sorry, y'all are barking up the wrong tree if you think that's helping you. You're happy to play along with NAR and RPAC and play their little games and go to their, golden circle gatherings in Bermuda with Trump supporters, Trump White House people who were there speaking to you. I'm not playing that game. I'm not going to play that game. And my own brokerage decided to have our big conference the last 3 years in Florida. I said, I'm not attending if it's in Florida. I'm not giving them $1. I said, if you're going to tell me that you're going to do something, and while we're there, we're going to take some sort of definitive political action, make a statement. It was my same statement why I wasn't going to Houston when the Alliance was in Houston. I said, I know Houston. I grew up in Houston. I know that. And I think Houston itself is, very, very blue, but just a few years ago, they voted down I think it was, I can't remember what the amendment was, but it took away the rights of LGBT people that had been put in place by city council. So even the bluest places, if you're going to show up there, if you're going to do something and you're going to take your attendees there and you say you're taking the fight to Texas, then take the fight to Texas. Show up, do some sort of demonstration to show and prove that you are here to make a change and make a statement. But unfortunately, NAR doesn't play that. They want to make everyone think everything is okay. And I can't play that game. And that's why I'm no longer a member. So
You just unpacked a lot of truth in that entire segment there. When the LGBTQ Real Estate Alliance invited this person to be our speaker, I'm glad you remember her name because I don't. And it was we started the session. Ryan, who was the president of the Alliance at the time, started the session by basically silencing the whole room and telling us, we will not speak out or this session will be closed. They knew there would be, first conversation in the room, and he did not want that. He
right.
wanted us to just let this person speak. And as a guest, I can understand you want your guests to feel, but there needs to be conversations that are real. And we were silenced in that room. And we were told not to speak or the whole thing would be off. And I'm sitting there in the front row with, I think, one of my other agents, Jed, was beside me at the time, going, I'm just going to stare then. I'm just going to make eyes. Because there are things that need to be said that were not said. There are people who have empowered the PACs for years and defended the PACs for years, as the PACs funded every anti-gay, anti-trans, anti-immigrant, anti-women candidate out there, there's nobody too heinous if you're a friendly incumbent,
Oh,
to
absolutely.
get
Well,
money.
in Congress right now, virtually every single one of those that is voting to take away our rights and voting right now to impact immigrants and destroying our country, virtually every one of them was endorsed by RPAC. I mean, come on, stop. And then a few years ago, when I've called and engaged my local, state, and with NAR, expressing my concerns about that, have always been met with, but we also endorse, progressives and Democrats. You endorse incumbents. You have told me that is your goal because you want to maintain power. You aren't interested in making a difference. You are interested in maintaining the status quo, which in my opinion, is the reason the NAR was created in Chicago, dealing with some of the mob boss mentalities at the time, is that your goal is to maintain the status quo. That is what you've always done for over 100 years. You're not interested. And there can be some great conversations, and we thought we had made meaningful changes with the code of ethics, but we see that's under attack in Texas,
Texas.
Texas recently, Montana. The exact same thing is happening in Montana, and so the code of ethics, in my opinion, is only effective if your local association that enforces it is effective. And in my community, that's not reality. It's a conservative association, and they will never call it out and really and truly enforce it. I was encouraged when they did in Missoula, Montana, a few years ago, and it was, I'm glad that they did call it out then by that heinous pastor who was also a realtor. But it's not helpful. It's not helpful. And so we have to understand who our allies really are and understand that only goes so far. That you have to at some point stand up and take care of yourself and do what's right for yourself, your community, and um, your own well-being. And that's why I think the logic behind Flee Red States is completely logical. You have to take care of yourselves and not rely on lip service from any association, whether it be an LGBT association or it be NAR. You have to take care of yourself.
And Gene, I want to make a caveat to how the RPAC and the other political action committees for realtors are they do the incumbent. TreePack used to Texas Real Estate Political Action Committee used to tell us that same thing until it didn't suit them to do the incumbent when the incumbent was Democrat, and then they had another excuse.
Right.
And go on, Bob.
The first election of Greg Abbott. Greg Abbott was rising from his previous position, I believe, as lieutenant governor or as attorney general, and he was a TreePack endorsee. He was running against Wendy Davis, who was also a TreePack endorsee as long as she stayed in her place in the legislature. Two TreePack endorsees, both of them should be blessed. They endorsed Greg Abbott before the primary. Before he even won the Republican primary, they endorsed him for governor. So don't give me this friendly incumbent crap.
Yeah.
Also, the other lie that they will say is, well, the Realtor Association isn't the same as the PAC. They're two different organizations. We can't bind the PAC to our code of ethics. Well, in every meeting, we are banged in the head to donate to the PAC, not to the Shriners, not to Children's Hospital, to the PAC. Okay, everybody sitting in the boardroom of the PAC is a realtor. You're meeting in the realtor building to talk about the PAC. When I kick the leg of the PAC, the rest of the body yells at me for it. It's the same body. If I'm mad at the PAC and you're disinterested, you should be like, well, that's great. He's mad at Kroger today. It should not matter to you that I'm upset with them. But when I do get upset, you blackball me from committees. You talk about me behind my back. You do things because I'm attacking something that is attached to you. And you do control. Okay. They will also say, well, just join the committee and get on the endorsements. You'll understand better. Well, if I get outvoted, and 9 people in the room say we're supporting Ted Cruz, and I go, no, I'm still obligated to raise money for Ted Cruz and pay for my own disenfranchisement. So I've always
Well,
taken the position from Hamilton, you cannot put out the fire from inside the house. The
well, I
master's
served
tools
on,
will
you
not
know, I
break down
keep,
the master's, house. Yeah.
well, and just like you're saying, I mean, and that's one of the things when I have raised concerns and been just as vocal as many people about it, the issues, and I'm told, well, you just need to get involved on a committee. I served on our local government affairs committee for 3.5 years, and I finally said, my apologies. I finally said, enough. I'm out. Every meeting, when we would vote, I would say I'd be the lone no vote in a group of 30 people. I'd be the lone no vote to endorse particular persons. And then make it even worse was when we were voting on endorsements, we would vote on endorsements, but then we weren't allowed to ask any questions. We weren't part of that. There was really a hand selected committee of 5 people within our association who really put those endorsements, who brought them to the government affairs committee. And so the government affairs committee was really only window dressing. We were really not the ones involved in the interviews. We weren't involved in making the real decisions. We were just there to give the
Rubber stamp it.
appearance of, we were a window dressing committee. I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to waste any more of my time and effort in doing this. And so I was out. I'm like, I'm done. And there were more than one occasion when I would have very tense conversations with the president of the association, and it changes each year, of course. But all the GA was always the same people year after year after year, because it's a control. It is maintaining the status quo. And so it rings hollow to me when you say you just need to get involved. I have been involved. We have all been involved over and over again. And you can only keep slamming your head against a brick wall so long before you realize, I have to do something different. They're not going to change, so I'm going to change. And so that's what we have to do.
I
So when
always
you're
say
hiring,
this.
go ahead. Go ahead,
I
Leslie.
always say this. I always say this. They always tell you, just take that seat at the table. Once you have that seat at the table, you can make change. No, that seat at the table often limits what you can do. And I I can't work under those limitations. I can't I'm better on the streets yelling and screaming and protesting and reminding those people who have that seat at the table why they are there. Because they often forget, because they get comfortable, because they have acceptance.
Well, it's in exactly right in that. So, I don't want to have a seat at the bullies table. That makes me a bully. I'm not going to have that seat. I'm going to be outside that group, and I'm going to call out those bullies when they're being a bully. And just like you said, you limit what you say. What finally was the straw that broke the camel's back for me with the GA committee locally was, they put out a statement that we all were required to sign that said we would never speak against the GA committee, that we would never speak out against what they were doing. So much so that I said, I'm willing to sign all of this. But these 2 sections right here, I can't sign that, because I'm going to speak out, and I'm going to speak my mind in the meeting and outside the meeting. And so, yeah, that was it. I said, I'm not signing that. Sorry, I can't sign that.
Let's touch on something here that we as realtors should be proud of, and something that's going on currently in the news. Article 10 of the Realtor Code of Ethics is the non-discrimination article. It came about, as I understand, in the 1970s as fair housing was passed. It replaced Article 5 of the Code of Ethics, which used to say that a realtor, from 1930 to 1970, a realtor cannot introduce a person of race or nationality into a neighborhood who would be a disturbance to that neighborhood. So the realtor boards were in on redlining and in on discrimination. And it was only until Congress and the president at the time passed, the
Housing.
Fair Housing Act, thank you,
Right.
that we ended up with this glorious Article 10, which I'm going to put up on the screen here, which is Realtors shall not deny equal professional services to any person for reasons of race, color, religion, sex, disability, familial status, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity. Realtors may not be parties to any plan or agreement to discriminate against a person or persons on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, disability, familial status, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity. Okay, so we were in the room in New Orleans when sexual orientation was added to the code, and a few years later, gender identity was put in. Okay, we watched this happen. Now, standard of practice 5 has been getting some heat in Texas, and there are some realtors who are super proud that we're about to be able. This is just infringing on our religious rights and our freedom of speech. Article
Right.
5, I'm sorry, Article 10, Standard of Practice 5 says realtors must not use harassing speech, hate speech, epithets, or slurs based off of race, color, religion, sex, disability, familial status, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity. I want to know what words they feel they can't use. I want them to say them to my face. I want them to get on a blog or get on a video with me and call me every name they think they want that they're being held up from saying. Say it to my face. Come on my show. Say it. I
Well,
want to see this happen.
it's the exact
Because if
same
you
thing.
feel that those words are holding your real estate career back, I'm going to have some discussions about that.
Well, and it's the exact same thing. It's the exact same thing is when a particular, when Elon Musk gets on a stage and does a Nazi salute. Oh no, that wasn't really what you're saying. Then do it. Do it right now. Videotape yourself, put it out there, and tell me how your clients, customers, and family and friends relate to that. It's the exact same thing. Then use that word, call me what you really want to call me. And if you say it with a Bible verse, that doesn't mean it's protected by religion. You're still, attacking me on an immutable aspect of who I am. Do not, do not take that cover. And if we know that that's coming. We saw it coming because in Montana, for example, when they actually did, the local association did absolutely hold that pastor because he was attacking the local LGBT community. They did hold him accountable, fined him, and actually suspended him from being a member. And here in the Northwest, I drove over to be part of that Pride celebration in that town with the Alliance to show them that we were there to support them. And in here in Spokane, I had other agents. We're all members of groups of realtors and brokers, agents in our communities. And they get on there and they say, we need to fight back against this. We need to fight back against this. And I had people calling me saying, we want to leave the association, but we're not allowed to leave the association. We don't want to be held to 10.5. And I said, well, I pulled out of the association, but I expressly agreed to 10.5. I had a problem with the rest of it, but that's the only part that I embraced. And I put it on my website and put it on my Facebook page that I fully embrace this. But I can't live with the rest of what you're up to. So and it was the only reason that my brokerage allowed me to leave NAR was because that I didn't want to use that. I wasn't leaving, so I could ignore 10.5. I was embracing it. So it's painful to me to see it, but since Reagan, this has been the game plan of every political election. We're going to demonize someone and to get out their voters. It used to be just the LGBT community. It used to be just the gay community, and then now when we've become much more accepted. Now they're going to focus on the trans community. And so I'm going to fight just as hard for the trans community as I did for the gay community. And so the whole LGBT normal gay movement doesn't fly with me. And I know it doesn't fly with either of you. So it is unfortunate that that we're fighting all these battles all over again. I fully expect that to prevail. I honestly would not be at all surprised if the NAR votes to amend 10.5 and votes to amend that statement. I wouldn't surprise me in the least, because they're getting so much pushback from their members about it.
I think that I think what you'll probably more likely see is that they just don't acknowledge it exists anymore. They'll just kind of leave it there, but we're not going to say anything. If you report somebody, we're not going to say anything. And here's how we know that they're getting desperate. It's no longer even it's because they went all the way to now we're after the trans community because we can't really go after gay people anymore because we're more accepted. I mean, now they're inventing furries using kitty litter boxes at schools. I mean, this is how we know that they're getting desperate because where do they go from there? Where do they go from there?
Right.
And I know, listen, my nephew's like in his 30s, and God, my nephew's, but he and his friends, and even younger than that, they don't care. And an example I will give is one of my cousin's grandchildren. I just had a family pass and went to the funeral. I didn't recognize this person because literally the kid's like 20 years old, and I'm 53, and came up to me, knew my name. I'm just like, okay. And I give like that little side hug. I don't know who this person is. And I was like, who is that? And I was like, and they tell me who it is. And I was like, oh my God, that's my cousin's grandchild. So it's like my third cousin.
Right.
I'm not even quite sure what that means. But I found out later that apparently, although I don't know him, he's very familiar with me. And apparently in this little small town where I grew up, like people, kids like him, I say kids, he's 20, they don't care about,
No.
if you're gay or they're like cool with it all. And when it came from his grandmother, my cousin, saying, apparently talked about me a lot over the years. And he apparently follows me on Facebook and feels like he knows me, even though I don't feel like I even know him at all because I wouldn't even
Right.
recognize. But it's one of those things where there's this acceptance that that we have that we don't even really get to see because there's none of the pushback that we are used to seeing. And I go back
Right.
to that
It's
small
different.
town. Yeah. And I go back to that small town where I grew up, which was not a pleasant place. And it wasn't. Listen, we're known for the great hanging, if that tells you anything. The great hanging.
Oh, yes.
That is our pride and joy. And but I was driving through, taking my mom on a little tour of like an old neighborhood, and the kid I was best friends with when I was in grade school, he doesn't live in that house anymore, but gay people do, and they have a pride flag out. And I was like,
Perfect.
oh my God, like there's change. And then I stopped at a little coffee shop, and there's this cute little gay couple, and I was like, oh my God. And so I see
Yeah.
that change. I still have that trauma to go back there, but at the same
Yeah.
time it's changing in ways that we're not really seeing because it's not as loud and as overt as we had to be
Right.
because literally they were trying to kill us type of thing. So
Yes.
and part of that is I'm glad that they're not that they're not having to experience what we all had to experience. Another part of it is I was like, I hope they see that it can go back to that
Well,
that they see that what has happened can happen again.
Well, and therein is the problem, in my opinion, is that we have several generations of young people who have grown up not understanding or not having to deal with some of what we had to deal with, and they don't realize how fragile those freedoms are. I mean, here on my wall behind me, I have an Ann Richards campaign poster and a picture at the top, which was her when she was taking her oath of office in front of Austin, a Goldbeck photo. So
Yeah.
just a few years ago, the state of Texas was a fairly liberal space to
Hmm.
live in. And
That was
so,
the 90s. Yeah.
yes. And so go back, and if people really think about it, it's like, wait a minute, the same state of Texas that elected Ann Richards in statewide office several times and then governor and turned around and switched gears and suddenly thought that the current MAGA world is logical, it can turn on a dime. And
Yes.
so I fear for young people who don't really understand that fight. And so it's incumbent upon us to share with them our experiences and to encourage them to keep their eyes open and understand that every single day things are changing that could impact you long term. And so it's frightening. So the gay couple who is having dinner in small town Texas openly today may have to deal with being chased out of there with torches and pitchforks tomorrow. So it's not a big change. It's just take a handful of people to create that hysteria and that fear and drive them right back into the closet in away from those small towns. So we have to prepare them. We have to prepare them. And I think we do a disservice to them if we don't share the stories and if we don't try to prepare them. They will discount it, and many of them will discount it. And it's not fear mongering, it's trying to prepare them.
So let's bring this to a positive note towards the end here. What are books or literature or things like that that you can think of that the younger generation should read or watch and understand to understand the queer fight and the LGBTQ fight that's going on right now? For me, it's definitely Angels in America, both parts, because you'll learn about Roy Cohn. You'll learn about the person who was teaching how to be this vicious political machine that we now see in this country. Okay. Angels in America, it deals a lot with, LGBTQ history, but it also has that in there, which you should go get. The other one is a play that's going to be maybe hard to find on any sort of video, so you need to read it, called Bent, which is about gay men during the Holocaust
Yes.
and how they were treated and what they had to do to survive. So Angels in America and Bent would be two things I would suggest that every LGBTQ person at least understand and know. What would be one or two books or movies or something that you think that the next generation of activists after us need to know about?
Well, I think that greater than movies or books, I think that they need to go to their handheld device and search for some individuals. Find out the story of Dr. Frank Kameny. Who was Dr. Frank Kameny? You know, find out who Barbara Giddings was. Find out who Jose Saria was. Look these people up and look up the organization ACT UP and understand that we need to be more like ACT UP and less like HRC these days. Um, um, they both have need in our community, but ACT UP will tell you what you should be doing today. And so search these out and look for them, and look back at moments. There's a great book that I have, and it's a long read, but the book is called Before Stonewall. And so it
Yeah.
speaks of the fight before that moment at Stonewall and all those who fought that battle before Stonewall that allowed Stonewall to happen. There were Stonewalls before that. They just weren't in New York City with all the media attention that was in New York City. And so seek out stories about those people and learn about them, and really see that we need those moments again. And we're going to be confronted with those, and it's how we learn to deal with those moments. And those are vitally important, in my opinion. So
Good choices. Leslie?
Um, Listen, you've already mentioned them. Like, I, other than I think there needs to be more study on trans history, and the real movement, because we all saw the Stonewall movie as a bunch of little white boys in the Stonewall movie. There was that didn't mention that it was those people of color who are also trans that were really that movement that made that happen. It was just very whitewashed. I think we need more of that, and I think um, to kind of see why ACT UP became what it was, why it was so necessary during that time. I think the entire 80s, you from Reagan on, needs to be really looked at really hard. You see, this is where things really changed. The 80s made a huge difference in the change, not only in the LGBTQ community, what we had to do. We had to stand up, we had to fight. But to the Republican Party, there was a huge shift in the 80s that people don't want to really, they're like, oh, yeah, it was the 80s. It was good. We had great music, we had great fashion, cocaine. That's what they talk about. But I'm just saying but politically, there was a huge shift in the 80s that people don't really acknowledge.
So let's talk about that. When Reagan was running for office after Nixon, the Republican Party was just shamed. They had Ford for a half a term, and then Carter came in, and things went crazy. And Reagan came in because he brought in the moral majority. Okay, the Republican Party historically will take a fringe group and bring them in and embrace them, and the moral majority gets brought in, and so that's where they get their religious bent to come in. And then a couple of years later, we have more elections, and the Tea Party. Well, they're kind of fringe and kind of out there, but bring them in. And now it's the MAGA movement. The Republicans are always finding a fringe group and bringing them in so that they can maintain their numbers, because their numbers are not going to maintain themselves when people realize the programs they bring are not good for you personally.
Right.
So they've always been building that fringe group and bringing it in situation. And that started, I maybe it goes back further, but to me, it started in the 80s with Reagan.
Well, and for so many people, when I hear them, extol all the virtues of Ronald Reagan, the great Ronald Reagan, I'm like, well, no, he killed thousands and thousands of people. Dozens of my own friends don't talk to me about the great Ronald Reagan. Really find out. And that's one of the things that concerns me the most about some of the changes that we see happening today with the Department of Education and so forth, is changes to the history. When you can rewrite the history, much like they did after the Civil War, with putting all of these statues and glorifying the Civil War, it is the exact same thing. You can't whitewash our history, change our history to make it look better in textbooks and in your classes, when that's not what really happened. Those of us who lived it, those of us who saw it, have to speak up loudly, beat the drum, and fight back against those who try to rewrite our history. We know. I was so encouraged. There was recently an action in Washington, D.C. in front of HUD, where they came and they stacked up 200 coffins in front of HUD. It's like, those are the sorts of things, the die-ins in the street, those are the sorts of things that changed hearts and minds of the public.
Yes.
Because we united together. And going back to something Jose Sarias said when he was fighting the police entrapment of the 50s and 60s, is united we stand, divided they catch us one by one. We have to understand that if we all pull together, we can move mountains, we can make a difference. And ACT UP proved that to us, and we are going to have to get back to that, and we have to do some of those same tactics that at the time many in the mainstream gay community were against. That no, you can't be abrasive, you can't be in your face, you have to sort of slowly make changes. No, you have to draw the line in the sand and say, we're not going to accept it anymore. I mean, it wasn't that many years ago they were trying to ban drag in the Houston Pride Parade.
Yes.
I mean, I vividly remember that. It's like, oh, we're not doing drag or leather guys this year in the Pride Parade. We're asking people to come and be dressed a little more. No, So it happens everywhere, and it's a cyclical thing, and we have to be willing to stand up. And I appreciate those who do, and I appreciate those who are take the chance of being called, rebels, and being called, the names that you and I have been called, Bob, when we stand up and say that's not acceptable.
Listen, I'm happy
Yes.
to accept the name of troublemaker. They want to call me a troublemaker, go right ahead. Because I'm not
Feel
here to make
free.
your life easy. I am not here to make you comfortable. I
No,
am not going out of my way to do that for you. Your
absolutely.
issues with our community are yours, not
Yours, not mine.
not mine. So I
And
get that.
and although the community didn't used to be called the trans community, there have always been gender nonconforming people
Yes.
um, throughout time eternal. And they didn't
Right.
use the term trans in those days, but they were gender nonconforming. And whether you like it or not, a man in a dress is going to happen. So embrace it, live with it. We're here. We're not going away. And we're not going to make it, we're not going to leave just to make you feel comfortable. And so that's the one message I think that we need to share with everyone. And there is a better way. I grew up in Texas, and until I moved to Washington State, I really had no idea there were places that you could go, that you could freely hold hands with your loved ones. You could freely show who you really are. And so, well, that's why programs such as yours with Flee Red States is so important, is to let people know there is an option, and there are
And
people who support them, and there are places you can go to be supported. And so,
one of the things I tell people is if they want to stay, stay. That's great. But
yes,
we cannot win Texas back. It's gerrymandered to the hilt. Florida, we cannot win back. Move to a purple state and make it bluer. Move to a blue
yes,
state and
absolutely.
be safe. But even the blue states, if we lose our federal protections, the blue states may not be great, because you talked about Houston, and there are gay bubbles around. I have friends in Fort Lauderdale, and I've got friends in Palm Desert, whatever, and they talk about being in their gay bubble. But when the state passes something called preemption, that says in Texas, if the state does not have a law that protects people, no municipality can either. That
Right.
collapses those bubbles. So suddenly Montrose and Oak Lawn and whatever Austin, keep Austin weird. No longer do you have a bubble.
Right.
So if you want to stay, stay, great. What I do know about history is when a population is forced to migrate, when they are forced at the end to migrate, that's when people lose their wealth and their property. If you're going to make a move to a place where it's okay to hold your partner's hand, where it's okay to be a woman in a suit, where it's okay to be a man in a, where whatever you want to be,
Right.
whoever you want to be, make it before everybody else has to get on the train too.
And just know that there is an option, and there are people in throughout the country and throughout the world who will welcome you and will help you
Yes.
and will assist you. And I think that's
Yes.
why it's important that we have these sorts of conversations, to know that there are options. And I'm going to Texas in a week or so, to go to visit my family in San Antonio. And I know that it's a nice little bubble there, but I'm driving outside town to where my family cemetery is, and it's not very friendly there. And so we just have to be aware, and I will act accordingly to protect myself and my grandchildren when we are out and about. And unfortunately, that's just the reality of it. But I appreciate what you do, and I appreciate you working, trying to make this happen. And know that I support you, and know that I support the effort, and know that if I can ever help in the Spokane, Washington area, I would be happy to.
Thanks for being on here. We will have another podcast in a couple weeks, and keep reading our website, Flee Red States, and look for any updates you need. If you have any questions, reach out to us. We'd love to help you. Gene, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so
Thanks.
much. Y'all have a great afternoon.